We've all heard people say this before. How does Kobe only have one MVP? How does Shaq only have one MVP? How does a guy like Steve Nash have two MVPs but Kobe and Shaq only got one? These are things that you've probably heard before. People tend to ask these questions like it's ridiculous to even believe they don't have any more than that. However, when you look at it through the context of their situations and the NBA landscape, I think it does make sense why Kobe and Shaq only got one each. Now, were there other seasons when they played like MVP caliber players? Yes, of course. However, it's hard to say that they deserved it over somebody else in the seasons when they did not win the award. Kobe won the MVP in 2008 and Shaq won MVP in 2000. In this video, we're gonna take a look at both players throughout their careers and talk about certain seasons. Which other seasons could they possibly have deserved it? I'm going to break it down year by year and talk about which years they could have maybe won another MVP, but they did not. How's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and let's get started. First, let's start with Shaq, drafted in 1992 with the first overall pick. He was incredibly dominant as a rookie with one of the best rookie seasons ever. However, the Orlando Magic still finished with just a 41-41 record, and obviously, his numbers were not good enough to warrant the MVP. In his next two seasons, he got drastically better. 1994, however, was the year of Hakeem Olajuwon. But for 1995, Shaq had a legit argument for MVP. He would lead the league in scoring as the Orlando Magic won 57 games, making it all the way to the NBA Finals. However, as we all know, the MVP voting is done before the playoffs begin, so making it to the finals is completely irrelevant. David Robinson was the guy who won MVP in 1995, as he would lead the Spurs to 62 wins, the best record in the league. The voting for that year was very close, with Shaq coming in second place in a tightly contested MVP race. Now, Shaq had a legit argument to win it in 1995, but he narrowly missed it. Aside for the difference in records, I think another reason he didn't win was because his teammate, Penny Hardaway, was also a superstar. Penny would also finish in the top 10 in MVP voting as well, so in the eyes of the voters, having two superstars on one team kinda hurts both players individually. I call this the multiple superstar effect. It's kinda like how when Steph Curry and Kevin Durant teamed up. Of course, they both won MVPs before, but in their 4 years together in Golden State, neither of them could win the MVP despite the Warriors dominating. Essentially, what happens is that the votes are split between them. So if we take everything into consideration, it makes sense why Shaq did not win it in 1995. Over the next few years, Shaq would continue to dominate, finishing top 10 in voting for multiple years. But through a combination of injuries and inconsistent team performances, he was not a true MVP contender until 2000. Shaq would win the 2000 MVP in a landslide, almost a unanimous vote. So why didn't he win back-to-back? Well, Allen Iverson in 2001 became the biggest story of the entire season. Was he a better player than prime Shaq? No, of course not. But the MVP is not all about being the best player. Iverson and the Sixers finished the season with 56 wins, the exact same number of wins as the Lakers that year. Contrary to popular belief, Iverson's team was not that bad. The Sixers were actually quite solid, sporting the Coach of the Year in Larry Brown, the Defensive Player of the Year in Dikembe Mutombo, and the Sixth Man of the Year Aaron McKie. But we all know Iverson essentially carried that entire team in scoring. He was the only guy on the team who can create his own shot, and he had to create for his teammates as well. However, Shaq's teammates were still better, mainly because he got Kobe, and Kobe was rising up the ranks. Oh, and let's not forget Tim Duncan, who also finished ahead of Shaq in the voting results, as the Spurs actually had the best record in the league. So this year was just not in Shaq's favor. 2002 was a similar story, as Duncan would win that year. Shaq could have won this year as well, I guess, but he did miss 15 games because of an injury and suspension, which kinda left a bad taste in everyone's mouths. And I mean, statistically, this was Tim Duncan's best individual season of his career, so it's hard to argue against that. 2003, the Lakers finished with the 5th seed and Kobe led the team in scoring and finished ahead of him in the MVP race. It was around this time where we saw a shift in power within the organization as Kobe's rise coincided with Shaq's fall and eventual trade. 2004. Although this was the year of the Lakers super team, it was Kevin Garnett and the Wolves who captured everyone's attention in the regular season. Up until this point, Shaq had the worst scoring season of his career, averaging just 21 points per game. Now, around 2005-ish, Shaq was starting to look vulnerable. He was no longer the dominant force he once was, and by the time he joined Miami, it would not be his team. We've heard Shaq say many times that he believes that Steve Nash stole 2 MVPs from him, but it was not really like that. The 2005 MVP race was insanely close. I mean, just look at the difference in their vote totals. Shaq barely lost. However, you can't argue against Nash bringing a struggling Suns team that won only 29 games previously to now 62 wins. The Suns would go on to contend for half a decade under the leadership of Nash. This was the closest year that Shaq could have won a second MVP, but alas, Nash also deserved it. After 2005, Shaq never finished in the top 10 in MVP voting for the rest of his career. Moving on to Kobe. For most of Kobe's early career, he did play behind Shaq. For the first couple years of his career, he was coming off the bench, he wasn't a true star, and he was getting into the swing of things. In fact, for the first 5 or 6 years of his career, he was Shaq's sidekick and the secondary star on the team, so there wasn't a real chance for him to win MVP. It wasn't until 2003 where Kobe started to overtake Shaq. However, around this time, Kobe's reputation off the court would take a major hit. That whole sexual assault scandal was a huge deal, a national story. While the allegations were eventually put to rest and they settled out of court, it damaged Kobe's image. Now, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but I do believe that's partly why the voters did not want him in the MVP conversation. It would not be a good look for Kobe to be the face of the league during the ongoing trials. But regardless, there were better options at the time. Like, you can't blame Duncan for winning it twice when he was at his peak and the Spurs were winning more games. Anyway, later on, Shaq would get traded and then the Lakers would be pretty damn bad for a few years there. From 2005 to 2007, despite Kobe putting up ridiculous numbers, his best individual stats, it's not plausible to win MVP when your team just wins around 40 games and finishes 7th in the conference. Well, that's usually the case, although there are exceptions, most notably when Westbrook won it in 2017 as a lower-seeded team. 2006 was the year that people point to and say that Kobe should have won, as he averaged over 35 points a game and carried a terrible team to the playoffs. But believe it or not, Kobe only finished 4th that year. If anything, I thought Dirk deserved to win it instead of Nash. Dirk would win MVP a year later though in 2007. That year, the Mavs won 67 games and they were ridiculously good, even though they did lose in the first round. Fast forward 1 year later, and Kobe would finally win his first ever MVP in 2008. After that though, Kobe would place in the top 5 until 2013, his last great season, but he could not capture that second MVP. This era was dominated by LeBron, with a sprinkle of Derrick Rose. Nobody could argue against LeBron, he was carrying some mediocre Cavs teams to 60+ wins. He was having the best years of his career in Miami. LeBron defined this period of time, there's no doubt about that. Overall, looking at Kobe's career under a microscope, you'd see that there weren't too many opportunities for him to win the MVP. It's not to say that he didn't deserve to win it, it's just that he played in a very tough era. And by the time the Lakers started winning championships again, LeBron overtook him as the new guy in the spotlight. Even in 2008, a lot of fans today still argue that Chris Paul should have won it. For Shaq, he finished in second place numerous times, and it's arguable he could have won more. But for those years, it was too close to call and it could have gone either way. Shaq still had a far more dominant prime than any of them. Anyway, that's all, folks. That sums up the truth about Kobe and Shaq having just one MVP to their names. It's a discussion that's been debated and talked about for years, but after watching this video, I hope you guys now have some context on why they never won more than one. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section, and if you think they deserve to win it in another season, and which season do you think that is? Thank you everybody so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you next time. Peace out.